Welcome back to Proof Theology. My name is Chase Davis. It's good to be with you here today. You may have noticed I haven't been releasing as many episodes. I hope to correct that soon, but I wanted to let you know about some things I've been working on. First of all, I've been recording an audiobook version of my book, which I know is really exciting for some of you. You've been asking if there will be an audiobook, and I've been busily taking time to read through it and restart. I didn't realize how much recording an audiobook would require me to pronounce words correctly and restart sentences, but I've been putting in the hours on getting that audiobook done. If you don't know Offensive Christianity, my book is coming out soon. By the time you listen to this, it may already be out, but you can go to offensivechristianitybook.com to order yours today. And like I said, we're getting the audiobook done, and that's part of the reason I've been so delayed in producing content here on Proof Theology. The other thing I've been working on that's really exciting that I think you'll be excited to learn more about. If you know anything about the podcast, I like to go into the sources. I like to go back so we can learn and how to apply theology today from rich sources from history. And one of the things that I like doing is going back and reading old works from old dead guys in Protestant history. And I have learned a lot in my doctoral studies from doing that, how to find these sources, how to translate them, how to understand them and apply them. And so over the last few months, I've been building a site, kind of a repository of Protestant thought, and I've just released it at commonplace.study. You may have seen it online. I've tweeted about it, and I'm really excited about it because it's a resourcement tool for Christians to go back into our Protestant history and learn our history. I'm finding old works that have never been published before, that have never seen the light of day, except on the recesses of the internet where you can find them on archive.org and you can find old scans of old books, and I'm bringing them to life on my site, commonplace.study. You can go there. You can ask any question you've got, whether you're a scholar or a pastor and you're researching for a paper or a presentation or a sermon, or you're just a lay Christian and you have questions about Protestant history or Christianity in general. For example, my kids were able to get on there and ask whatever happened to the dinosaurs, and it produced good scholarly cited works. The unique thing about commonplace.study is that instead of AI telling you what to think or what it thinks John Owen said, it's going to give you the source material because that's already hardwired into the database. And so it's going to pull up direct quotes with direct sources that you can go read yourself. I'm going to release a whole product demonstration on it in a later episode once I figure out how to do that. But for now, head over to commonplace.study, check it out. Let me know what you think. I'm really excited about the product because it's a tool that I want to use. It's a tool I built for myself, so it would make it easier for me to go back to Protestant history and understand what our forefathers believed, how they were thinking about theology, and really stay away from more liberal interpretations and applications of our history. So head to commonplace.study, check that out, offensivechristianitybook.com, and don't forget, jchasedavis.com is where you can keep up with my writing. That's going to pick up again soon as I get this audiobook done. All right, today on the episode, we're going to talk with Emma Waters about her book, Lead Like Jael. Now, you may be wondering, why would I have Emma on? Well, first of all, I'm interested in this book. I think it's a provocative title. I think we can all look around and see that women aren't doing well, especially with mental health, especially the more you get into more liberal context, there's a high diagnosis of mental health issues, and they really seem to be suffering and struggling. You know, my book was written and is written primarily to equip men, both Christian men and non-Christian men, for non-Christian men to understand the truth of the gospel and what Christianity is and what it has to offer to men, for Christian men to help build them up in strength in a feminized age. But there's a lot of needs for women today. They're not doing well. They're really suffering and struggling. And so we need more resources and literature and teaching for young women, particularly today, to help them understand the truth of the gospel and who God made them to be. I think Emma's written a great book. I'm really excited to talk to her about that book. And for you, audience member, I think it'll be helpful for you in understanding kind of like the challenges that women are under today and how we can help them love the Lord and love others well and obey Jesus in their lives. So with that said, let's get into today's conversation with Emma Waters. Welcome back to another episode of Proof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I am your host. We're going to be joined today by guest Emma Waters. She's author of Lead Like Jael. A lot of times we don't get to talk about women's issues on the podcast. We talk about a lot of different things with a lot of different guests who I really enjoy talking with. We talk about deep theological matters like sacramentology and Baptist ecclesiology. We talk about cultural issues. We talk about political issues. We don't really talk about women's issues, but it's important for us to know what's going on in women's life if we're going to lead and shape and help and be, fathers of households and husbands to wives. And so I'm really privileged to have Emma join me on the podcast. Emma, thank you so much for joining me today.
Chase, it's great to be with you.
So Emma, for those who don't know, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I am married to my husband, Jack Waters, who was actually a guest on the show a couple of months or a year ago at this point. We have two beautiful little girls, and we're actually expecting our third daughter now. So it's a very busy and exciting time in the Waters household. My husband is full-time in seminary, and I am also working with the Heritage Foundation as a policy analyst. And so outside of the book, a lot of my day-to-day work covers policy issues related to reproductive tech, biotechnology, family policy generally. So studying a lot of the policy issues where technology intersects with the human conception, human development, and then have this book where I'm far more practically diving into a biblical theology of how we actually think about these issues beyond just the social cultural dynamics I typically deal with.
That's excellent. And I believe you're a graduate of Union. Is that correct?
My husband is. I went to Lee University, which is another Christian liberal arts school closer to Chattanooga. So we met in the middle in Nashville, but yeah.
Excellent. Very good. Well, let's dive right into that, since a little bit of her bio, I think, kind of pertains to the topic of the book. Women are in a tension today. And there's a lot of narratives they've been fed, whether through media or schooling or whatever it is. For you personally and kind of your family, how have you all kind of, figured out what it looks like to, raise three children? I'm assuming you kind of view yourself as a homemaker, and yet you're also working. How have you navigated those tensions kind of in your marriage and in raising children?
Yes, it's such a good question, Chase. And I always frame the beginning of this question with, I in no way am applying this as the norm that other people should adopt. In many ways, my husband and I are living in an exception that we would not have guessed or planned on ourselves when we were getting married. So with my husband being full-time in seminary right now and working part-time, it's meant that we have decided that I would keep working full-time for a while. But we've been very, very bullish on what full-time actually looks like. And so thankfully, I work for an organization that is incredibly supportive of remote and flexible work. And so basically, it means I do a lot of very early mornings while our girls are sleeping. I make the most of our nap times, and we have, thankfully, really good nap times with the girls. And then we sort of flex the last 1 or 2 hours of the day that need to be covered work-wise and figure it out. So a lot of it is me primarily still being with the girls in the morning and then afternoons and evenings, and then just figuring out the other dynamics. But it's been, in many ways, surprisingly not as chaotic as we thought that it would be. It just requires a little bit of order and a lot of discipline on our part to make the most of it. And to be frank with you, we have my sister living with me right now, which is how I have a bit more flexibility to do podcasts around the book launch. And that's been a massive blessing, because without family support, it's just not possible. So that's basically how we've thought through it, or that's how we've practically done it. The way we've thought through it, big picture, has really been with a seasonal mindset. And so when we first got married, my husband was starting seminary. And so we had two options before us. We said, well, the quote responsible thing would be not to have kids until he finishes seminary. But seminary is at a minimum 3 years, and usually it takes about 4 years if you're working in any capacity. And it frankly just seemed really sad to us not to have kids for 3 to 4 years. And that seemed like a wrong priority in its own way. And then we've had various versions of it where Jack was working full-time and doing full-time seminary, and we never saw him. He would leave at 6 a.m. He would come back at 11 p.m. I was already in bed. The girls were in bed. Like he just like legitimately wouldn't see us for days on end. And that was miserable and frankly not great for our marriage. And so we sort of come to this place where we're like, okay, this is a balance where I'm still primarily with the girls, but he's actually able to be a lot more present because the pressure has been lifted. We have health insurance. That's a huge blessing, just on a practical note, especially as you are having kids. And so we've taken it very much as a season by season approach, which means that every time new semesters are coming, the girls are getting older, job dynamics are changing, we'll sort of reassess where we are, figure out what boundaries we're willing to have. And thankfully, just in the Lord's kindness and generosity, it's all worked out. Like my job has been willing to meet me where those places are. His flexibility and work has worked out nicely. So that's kind of how we've thought through it. It's not necessarily a rigid philosophy as much as it is practically speaking. How are we going to make this work, school, seminary, calling make sense for this season, and then figure it out once he gets a full time gig outside of school?
That's excellent. Yeah, I really appreciate you being transparent there because I can already hear some of my more base bro kind of podcast listeners going like, "This is not good," you know. But I'm a pastor and I know people and I know the situations they're in. I think about my own context in Boulder, and a lot of the principles, biblical principles we teach, whether we call them patriarchy or complementarianism or however whatever word we assign to them. I think there's a lot of families where it's very clear the husband's head of the home. It's very clear we're trying to follow and apply scripture to our lives. We're just trying to make ends meet where we are. And in a place like Boulder and a place like, any expensive city, for Christian families to live there, there may have to be some creativity during some seasons of life. And, there's always can be pushback. There always can be learn lessons like you guys did. But I appreciate you being transparent on that. One of the things that you mentioned in the book, kind of right off the top, and I've noticed this as well, being in kind of a more liberal area of the country, is that it seems that young women are really struggling. Particularly, they feel anxious, they feel depressed. This is, of course, across the board, but it's particularly true of liberal white women. They seem to be very, I don't know what the right word is without being too insulting of them, but like neurotic and angry and sad and lashing out. And so, can you help me kind of explain? Can you explain kind of what's going on there and why it's come to that when you see these charts that they're just diverging mainly leftward on a variety of social matters?
Yeah, men and women could not be further apart these days, especially among younger demographics. And conservative women and liberal women could, in many ways, not be further apart than they are now as well, in some ways. And there's a caveat we can get into on that front as well. But it seems like for decades now, women have been pushed this narrative that they can be anything that they want to be. They have every choice available to them under the sun. And yet, in no way have they been given a meaningful framework that actually helps them think through what it looks like to be a woman, to prioritize marriage, to have kids in light of all of that. So they've been taught this career first girl boss feminism message, and that's sort of the dichotomy I use in the book of girl boss feminism, this career oriented, success oriented mindset that says to succeed is to go quote out there, to make something of yourself, to mirror the masculine life script as much as possible. And that's really where true fulfillment is found. So men left the home from the agricultural era and the industrial age, and now women have followed. And is it this true success? Because by and large, we measure status, we measure, yeah, success based on these sort of external professional achievements. And in doing so, I think girl boss feminism and really every iteration of feminism has really pitted women against themselves in every measurable context. And the role of technology, I think, has been exceptionally powerful in this dynamic. So if you look back to like the 1950s, even the 1960s, birth rates were exceptionally high, regardless of your political leanings, regardless of your religious affiliation, though it was broadly more conservative and far more religious across the board. And then by 1972 to 1973, there was a massive drop off in births among women. Now, what happened in those years? Well, first, there was obviously the Roe v. Wade decision that erroneously decided that there was some sort of constitutional right to abortion. And yet in 1973, that's also the year that 10 million women adopted the birth control pill. It'd been building over the last decade, but that 1973 year was the year that it hit mass consumption among women in the United States. Well, then what comes after that? You have the sexual revolution, you have the career-minded movement, and this attempt to really strip women of anything that makes them distinct as women. And that was just what was happening technologically. And one of the things I think we can't ignore in this debate is that Whether we like there's sort of the old time well, what comes first? Does religion shape policy, or does policy shape religion? What role does culture have? And I think standing outside of all of those is the question of technology, and it seems like in many ways technology has actually shaped ideology and culture and policy as a downstream effect. And then you have technologies on the rise like IVF and then egg freezing, which in its original inception, IVF was a very narrowly tailored attempt to account for cancer treatments for women who were going to lose their eggs and for blocked fallopian tubes. Um, Still doesn't mean you have to support it or think it's justifiable, but it had a particular goal, and that's been completely blown out so that now it's incredibly common for women for benefits at jobs to say, well, freeze your eggs, we'll cover your IVF, don't worry about it. You can prioritize your career, have kids later, everything's going to be fine. And so it's just this onslaught of technology that tells you you can delay your fertility, that you can be just like men, that there's no essential difference. Culture telling you the same thing. And then, of course, questions around the economy, where, like, just practically speaking, some families are trying to make ends meet. But I think the end of that has been women being completely alienated from themselves, from marriage, from the idea of children, so that they don't have the necessary support systems, or even they're not in an environment where they can actually be women, and they haven't put themselves in an environment where they can be women. And at the end of the day, it's lots of depression and anxiety and SSRI use to make up for it.
So would you say, I talk about this in my book, but in my book's mainly for men, where I talk about status competitions, assertiveness. I talk about the workplace, the introduction of women to the workplace. I refer to Helen Andrews and her kind of studies on what happens in workplaces when women are introduced. Would you say that a lot of the women entering the workplace has kind of held up a masculine ideal that actually works against their nature? Because from my understanding biblically and just knowing how God made the world from natural laws, women are naturally more. I'm going to use the word inclusive, not in a pejorative way, but naturally more like they're thinking about, how can we hear everybody? How can everybody feel included? This is why they dominate HR departments, and so there's this natural, like, not just tension, but almost like it grates against their nature and how they were made to be. Is that a fair way to say it? And I've just discovered a brand that is true to American heritage as possible. Seven Titans makes all American raw denim. Every other heritage American menswear has sold out to the American worker for cheap foreign labor. And most made in the USA brands still use foreign labor materials and put the tag on it anyways. Think about your favorite jeans brand, Wrangler, whatever it may be. Seven Titans makes jeans the old fashioned way with 100% labor. That's American, 100% American materials, down to every rivet, button, and thread. I own a pair. I want you to own a pair. Great jeans, durable. The denim is custom woven in the legendary White Oak Mill, the most historic denim mill in the world, which every pair of Levi's 501s for 100 years was made in. Levi stopped using the American materials along with everyone else, but Seven Titans is part of the effort to save this historic mill and also revive American manufacturing to its true glory. They cut no corners in manufacturing, use only the highest quality material available. No cheaper filler materials, no stretch, no slop. Seven Titans is truly a return to Americans' denim tradition. So, whether you're LARPing like the Navy SEALs in Vietnam, or just looking for a great pair of jeans that will last, Seven Titans is for you. If you want to be part of the mission to restore American manufacturing and support an American heritage brand, check out 7titans.com. That's 7-titans.com. Use code PROOF, PROOF, for an additional 10% off your order, and it can be combined with other discounts. That's 7-titans.com.
Yes, I think that there's a lot to that. I think the point that I would really like pull on there is that the beauty of being a woman is to be compassionate and empathetic and kind and to make space. Your husband might be a little brusque and say things where you're like, that's so embarrassing. I can't believe he would have framed it that way, but let me smooth things over with a smile. And that works really well in the home and in the church. And that can be far more complicated to navigate in the workplace.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, in public life, it's going to get tricky, and I think that's why Andrew's thesis is pretty compelling, at least to me. You use the book in the book. I mean, it's in the title. Lead Like Jael. Jael is obviously the story of the woman with the tent peg, who drives it through the enemies of God, or one man who's an enemy of God who came into her tent, and then he used that as an illustration throughout the book. I think some readers right off the cuff are going to be like, so what are we saying here? Women should be warriors. Women should go into battle. What are we trying to promote here, Emma? So kind of unpack the illustration analogy of Lead Like Jail.
Yes. So the Lead Like Jael is a very tongue in cheek, provocative title, if you will, meant to really pick at the various responses that people have had to the story of Jael and her use of the tent peg. And Jael, I think, is one of those characters in the Bible where, for many years, feminist theologians and activists have sort of hailed her as, look, Jael is the perfect example of being a feminist and a Christian. She subverted the patriarchy. She took control of the situation. She didn't even need a man. And look at her fighting out there and defeating the enemy just like we can do today. And you see this in like every single movie about women fighting, where it's like, wow, she's going up against men twice her size and she's still
Right.
defeating them, completely ignoring all of the biological realities and the fact that like that's just not even present in the Bible and in mythology, but whatever. So I thought her story, as I was trying to engage with, and really as I was writing this book, my own journey was really wrestling with this career first messaging that I, even to a degree, I hadn't realized when I was younger, totally taken it in. I work in a world and have many, many friends and know many young women, even in the Christian context, who this is the thing that they're wrestling with. And so I chose JL because I realized in studying her story, she's, of course, nothing like the feminist icon that she's been made out to be. And in fact, her story is far more subversive, but not in the way that the feminists want it to be. So, what's actually happening in JL's story? Well, first, we find Jael at home in her tent as a wife and homemaker. Now, her husband and his tribe were part of the Midianites who had a long time agreement with Moses and the people of Israel until her husband Heber had actually made a covenant with the Canaanites against Israel. So, right off the bat, the story does begin in a very real sense with the men that were supposed to protect Jael, the husband who was supposed to be her head and lead her well, was not leading her well. I think for better and for worse, a lot of women can relate to that. Not justification for other actions, but like a lot of women can just relate to that reality of like your husband hasn't led you well. Well, now what do you do? And you sort of see this with Abigail and Nabal and David and other stories as well. And so she's put in a position right off the bat she never should have been in. Israel's at war with the Canaanites. The general stumbles out of battle as they're losing. He comes to her door. Now, the text tells us that as he was a little ways off, Jael looks out from her tent, sees him, and recognizes him, which tells us that she's politically engaged in what's going on. And I think is meant to sort of elicit this imagery of Lady Wisdom, where Lady Wisdom is out in the high places and sees the simple, calls them into her. So the general comes to her, asks for some water. She gives him some milk. The moment he falls asleep, she drives the tent peg through his head. And to your point earlier, in no way is the message of the story that we should therefore pick up weapons and engage in some sort of physical battle or be violent as women. That's like the last possible thing we should be doing. But the spiritual lessons from it, I think, are really fun and interesting for women today. So, what do we know about Jael and her context? Well, in her time, setting up and taking down tents was a feminine domestic duty. So Jael would have used those tools of a wooden tent peg and mallet hundreds, if not thousands of times to secure her home against outside forces. The thing that really struck me in this story is that the only way that she was actually equipped to defeat the enemy when he came knocking at her door was because she had been faithful to those daily, ordinary responsibilities of caring for her home. Now, it took a very violent approach in hers, and that's, I think, very descriptive, not prescriptive for today. But the message is the same, is that she was actually prepared to fight evil because of her daily faithfulness of washing the dishes and doing laundry and getting her kids up and being present and content. Had she not been in her home or had she not faithfully learned those practical skills, she could not have done this thing. Like I couldn't drive a tent peg through almost anything if I tried. And it's because it's not what we've been trained in. And the second thing that really stood out to me in that context is that Jael doesn't pick up a sword to fight. She doesn't run into battle. No woman in the canonical Bible ever picks up a sword to fight. But we do have a number of examples of women contending against evil using very distinctly feminine means to do so. And this brings us to one of the points we cannot ignore, which is that whether we like it or not, evil always comes knocking at the door of our home. Evil came in the Garden of Eden with Eve, and evil will always come to attack you where you are. So, as men and as women, as husbands and wives, it is completely insufficient to say, well, I'm just going to bury my head in the sand metaphorically, ignore the culture wars, and ignore the attacks of sin and deception that are going to come to our family. But we actually have to be vigilant in protecting against them and be ready to root out sin and kill it dead when it comes. Now, spiritually speaking, Ephesians 6, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to be ready to fight evil and not play footsies with it when it comes, which requires a high level of discernment, foresight, and shrewdness on our part. And ideally, that would have been addressed by the head of the household in Jael's case. That would be the husband who would be standing there as the defender of the home, first and foremost, and the wife standing behind him and standing with him and as his support. But in Jael's case, he wasn't there. And so while I don't dive into that as much, one of the things that, well, actually, I do in chapter 7. One of the things that I think is so interesting for women today is that typically when you think about men failing or men not being as present as they should be, there's sort of three responses. There's a response that says, well, we're just going to be passive, go along with them. And, if they're going to be evil and not be faithful to the Bible, well, whatever, we'll do what we want to do. There's a second response, which is where women say, well, actually, we're going to replace male leadership. We're going to replace men in the home, the workforce, the public sphere, and we're going to do what they haven't done. This is pretty resoundingly condemned in scripture. And every example you have of a woman trying to replace a man ends pretty badly with everyone, especially because you can't actually replace male headship. You're just like vying for bad leadership. It's a whole disaster. And so there's this third really interesting example of what does it look like for women to be faithful, even if the men or leaders around them have been faithless, but not do so in a way that seeks to replace them, but try to restore the order of the time. This is what Abigail and Nabal's story shows us. I think this is what Jael's story is pointing at. And I wanted to dive into that because I do think in the battle of the sexes that's waged, men and women have both been hurt and they have both hurt other people in very real ways. Sin and this life has not left anyone without many bruises, some very, very real. And instead of just pretending like, well, women, you've made a real mess of things and this is your fault and you should have done all of these things different. And there's certainly room for that whole conversation. I wanted to bring in the other side of too of like, okay, well, then what do you do in this very broken world where things haven't gone as they should? And I make it actually exceptionally clear that this is not like a warrior princess call. I'm actually very, very critical of that entire genre in another chapter, and tie in a lot of Jo Rigney and Abigail Dodds talking about what it actually looks like to not promote warrior princess, you go girl feminism in the church, but also say, well, even Lucy in the Chronicles of Narnia had a dagger. And sometimes there's moments where the enemy attacks and it's you. And how are you going to respond as a woman? Well, it better be to root out sin and kill it real quick, because if not, it will kill you. And so that's the narrative. That's the way that I'm playing with Jael in this case. But I wanted to rescue her back from the feminist narrative and really put her out there as this embodiment of femininity, at least in the sense of the spiritual lessons we can draw from her story.
That's excellent. I love the kind of reframing and approaching with a better biblical understanding and kind of the whole corpus of scripture and headship in the home and that kind of thing. One of the things you mentioned in the book is the kind of tradwife narrative. This has been talked about by others. I've never talked about it on the podcast because I don't really talk to these issues, but I know it's out there, and I know I pastor people who are seeing this stuff and have been tempted towards it. I mean, when I see kind of that narrative, and I've seen it out there, it's kind of like, let's get back to nature, let's be homemakers. And at first glance, I'm like, this seems good. This is what I would like to. I would like to provide this kind of life for my wife, where she doesn't have to do anything that's, leading like Jael or something like that. And yet you offer kind of a challenge to the tradwife narrative, which was surprising to me, to be honest, because I'm like, why would we not want to promote this in kind of a biblical framework? Why would this not be good for society? So maybe kind of tease out your argument. Maybe I don't know if it's counter cat tradwife, but it's definitely like questioning that narrative that's being kind of promoted widely today.
Yeah, so I use the dichotomy of tradwife, girl boss, but to your comments here, in no way am I actually equating the two, nor am I saying that tradwife in the sense of like we want to have traditional women who are homemakers and get married and raise kids. That's not actually what I mean by tradwife, because in a
Okay.
very real The online, so I'm using the sort of online persona of the tradwife movement because typically in a lot of the cultural debates that you're seeing, it's this tradwife online um, experience that people are talking about, not simply being a traditional wife. And this is one of the, I think, funny areas of the discourse where there's tons of truly traditional women who are the epitome of what you would want to see in a trad wife, who all say, in no way would I ever use the term trad wife. If they've been following it, they're like, that has so much baggage to it. And so if you follow the sort of online world, which is the one that I'm really talking about in the book specifically, what you tend to have is, in many cases, some trad wives are religious. Some trad wives are actually very, very pagan, and a lot of the larger accounts are very pagan in the way that they frame it. And so, using the sort of online persona, I think, is very problematic just to apply that as Christians rather than reframing the conversation. And then there's a few concerns that come with it, which is one, I think it, in the same way that girl boss feminism overly simplifies and says, well, women, to be a successful woman, you must do one thing, you must look one way, and this is how you succeed as a woman. The online iterations of the tradwife movement have been guilty of doing the same thing, where there's like literal conversations between tradwives online, who are also online all the time. And that's a whole other thing. And they'll say, well, tradwives would never go to Starbucks. And so if you're going to Starbucks, it means you're not actually being faithful as a woman. And tradwives would never let their husband change a diaper. And if your husband's changed a diaper, then you're failing in your responsibilities in the home. And if you want to be a successful tradwife, you need to do these 9 things. And like they'll list it off. Like it's very just like online culture. And the Bible gives us very clear descriptions of what it means to be a faithful woman. And those are fantastic. It's not what they're talking about. These are very culturally specific ways of saying to be a woman is to distill it down into a single listicle. And it oftentimes, I think, comes with like a very nostalgic, simplistic understanding of the home, the family, of suffering in the world. And so, something that Jack and I have actually talked a lot about when it comes to the trad wives, there's this one trad wife, Estelle Williams, or Esty, no, Esty Williams, who grew up in like a very weird, I think, home, tried the whole Hollywood thing. That didn't work out, and then launched her brand as a trad wife where she dresses in this 1950s clothing. A lot of trad wives dress really provocatively. Like they dress in ways that I would not want my husband watching trad wife content. So like there's lots of questions about like there's not much modesty in this depiction of womanhood you're showing me.
Sure.
Uh, and having this like very it seems like an attempt to escape suffering and escape some of the complexities of life and say, well, it's actually very simple. If you simply have this kind of traditional home where you simply do all these things, then you'll avoid all the problems that we're seeing in culture. And it's not that, and so all that to say, like the framework is actually just very different from what you see in the Bible, and it's its own sort of rigidity and nostalgic reaction to the culture that I don't actually think is ultimately very beneficial to equipping women with how to engage in the world today. And if you're being nostalgic, it means you're not actually being content in the world and the season the Lord has put you in. And you're not actually asking, how can I best take over and remake culture in the image of Christ, doing so as a faithful woman. So I don't outright condemn it. I'm like actually very like sympathetic to it. And so the way I frame it is I basically say, that the popularity of the tradwife movement, by and large, is a signal that women are not satisfied with the life script that they've been given. And on top of that, are really, it's really an indictment of girl boss feminism. The fact that you've seen so many women react so strongly against the sort of career first mindset means that like we've done things really poorly, obviously, and women are waking up to it and they want something better. But the reality is most women aren't going to move to a homestead, have 10 acres of land, and raise chickens. And so, what are the tools we actually need to give women to live faithfully in the place and season the Lord has given them? And that's really what Lead Like Jael is doing, is having this seasonal approach that puts first things first when it comes to getting married and having kids. And then actually asking, well, what does wisdom and shrewdness and the word of God teach us from there?
I can see that. Okay, so what we're saying is basically it's kind of putting forward an idealistic thing, and this is a challenge for anyone. I mean, I think technology. I agree with you on that. That it shapes a lot of discourse through imagery, through propaganda, through reels, through whatever it is, and it can be a temptation for guys too. But I think uniquely for women, you're saying it holds out kind of this ideal that is just another kind of like almost feminist upside down world where, it's another idealistic framing of women that oftentimes isn't based in the Bible. It's based in nostalgia. And it also kind of like can be its own burden. Like if I don't have chickens, I'm failing. And it's a standard to adhere to. Is that a fair way to kind of summarize what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm again very like in favor of traditional womanhood properly understood in the Bible. Yeah, it's those particular depictions of it that I think are so problematic. And actually one of the things I've really wrestled with in observing the movement is from a lot of the online tradwife discourse. Actually like a very strong feminist messaging of, instead of saying the workforce is the place where women should be in control and have power, a lot of the tradwives either implicitly or very directly say, well, no, the home is my domain. I'm in charge here and I will govern what happens. And in many cases, it's kind of like, look, we have two spheres. If my husband wants to go off and work, then that's totally fine, but the home is my place. And it actually ends up encouraging this sort of like intentionally or unintentionally, like Christian egalitarianism or pagan egalitarianism. And I was homeschooled. I saw this so many times in homeschool circles where like these very faithful, otherwise complementarian Christian homeschooling wives were like totally egalitarian in the way they ran their home. And they were like, oh, yes, my husband brings home the bacon, but I do everything else. And like their husband has no idea what's happening in the kids' lives. And in some of the cases, I think the women liked it that way because it actually gave them a domain where they weren't really being challenged. And that was also really concerning to me in the tradwife space, as well as like the very different, very ugly version of that in girl boss feminism, because neither of those actually give you a vision of marriage that I think you see in the Bible. Yeah, so lots of things on that front.
That's great because, yeah, that's an overlap with what I read about too, is that a lot of times men cede the home to the woman in an inappropriate way. And in the way the illustrations I give are the man cave or the library or study, whatever the man has a room. I'm in my kind of room right now, but that doesn't mean I'm off limits elsewhere. When I enter my home or when I'm at home, that doesn't mean I lose my authority. In so many Christian marriages, you'll have the joke where I may be the head of the home, but the wife is the neck, or my wife. And I don't think that's an appropriate way to frame things. The most particular example I give, and I try to mention this just because it's vivid for a lot of families, is that when it comes to decor and style preferences, many times it's easy as a man, for some men, to just go, you make all the decisions here, you make decisions about what we eat. I don't, that's your domain. And that can be, if we agree a lot, that can be fine. But a lot of times they're missing kind of an opportunity to lead in their home, even by weighing in on like, hey, I don't like that. I don't like that. It looks so feminine in here. I love that you have desires to express yourself or whatever, and you want to decor the home a certain way. I don't want it that way. And I think for a lot of Christian marriages, they'd be like, really, that's a problem. And it's like, yeah, you've kind of seeded like that you're just saying, I'm not going to think about this, which may be nice for you. But you're missing an opportunity to shape culture in your own home by letting your woman just like run the home in a way that is almost too permissive and subtly feeds kind of that feminist narrative. We got to wrap up because I've got to take my kids to school, as it turns out. But I did want to, make sure at the end, we directed people where to buy your book, where they can pick it up, and anywhere they can follow you. So can you kind of give that summary for people?
Yes. So the book is on sale with Amazon, in person and online with Barnes & Noble, and really anywhere books are sold. And then you can follow my work on X at EML Waters, and you can follow me on Instagram at EML Waters _.
Excellent. Well, Emma, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Of course, Chase. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Emma Waters. I know I did. Make sure you subscribe, smash that subscribe button, that like button, leave a comment, whatever you need to do. It helps get the word out about this channel. Don't forget to head over to commonplace.study, check it out, sign up for a free 14-day trial, and let me know what you think of the system. I think it's great, but I'm always taking user feedback, and I'm spinning up updates as soon as people get them to me and tell me what they want. I try to get it live, and don't forget to go to offensivechristianitybook.com, pick up your copy today, leave a review when it comes out, and share a copy with a friend. Until next time, I'll see you.